Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we have the pleasure of having Geoff Shepard on the podcast. So, during my research for the upcoming Watergate episode, I kept finding interviews that Geoff had given on this topic specifically. So, he actually worked in DC at the time after graduating from Harvard Law, and he became a White House Fellow in 1969. And then he served on President Richard Nixon's White House staff for 5 years, including a year as deputy counsel on the president's Watergate defense team. So, if anybody knows the stuff, he knows it. He has written three books and produced two documentary films, as well as an off Broadway stage play about the internal prosecutorial documents he's uncovered, many of which are posted on his website, www.shepardonwatergate.com. It's Shepard without the H, so Shepard, shepardonwatergate.com. And I'll link that in the show notes as well. Hi, Geoff. Thank you so much for coming on the rabbit hole. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm glad to be here too. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. I'm like deep in the rabbit hole about Watergate. So it actually didn't start with Watergate. It started because I wanted to look into Operation Northwoods with Cuba. And then I was like, well, I don't want to just do Northwoods. Let's just do like a Cuba episode. Well, then when I was doing the Cuba episode, I started finding all these CIA agents that also worked with Watergate. And I was like, that's weird. So I need to look into Watergate now too. So then I went down that rabbit hole and I
Yeah.
found you and here we are.
Well, Watergate is a very deep rabbit hole, and
Yeah.
in summation for your viewers, there's only three facts that you can count on in Watergate. There really was a break-in.
Hmm.
They were caught red-handed. So there's criminality from the start. There really was a cover-up because there was worry about who knew about the break-in advance. And some pretty senior people on the president's reelection campaign knew what was going on. And third, Nixon really did resign, the only president in our history to have resigned. But pretty much everything else you've been told is not true. And you've got this difficulty, particularly people like me who lived through it, who've gone back, looked at the records, and
Hmm.
and what makes it unique. The special prosecutors, the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, was a specially recruited, highly partisan bunch of Democrat lawyers, mainly Ivy League lawyers, whose goal in life was to get Nixon.
Mm.
And they got a hold of the prosecutorial machinery and used it to investigate, as they announced in their press conference, every allegation of wrongdoing committed by the Nixon administration since it took office. And that's what you've been taught, that's what you've heard about. But they were so eager to get Nixon and his people, they cut corners. Nobody was watching them. They were in charge. The media was on their side.
Right.
And they did secret meetings with the judges. They suppressed exculpatory evidence. They expanded statutes way beyond their normal meanings. And what makes it unique, and the press could care less, they hated Nixon too. Uh, they left a paper trail.
Mm.
They were so proud of what they were doing, they wrote memos to each other about it. And I learned 20 years ago, I learned their internal files, those that survived, are kept at National Archives. And
So
you
you
can
went and
put,
found them?
you can put in FOIA requests.
Oh.
And I've put in a lot of FOIA requests. I have filing cabinets filled with this stuff, and they're held in what's called special access down at the archives. And that's where all investigatory files end up.
Mm.
So the JFK assassination, the Clinton impeachment, they're all there. And they have to look at the memo you want or that your FOIA request covers, and they have to be sure that there are no names there who are still alive that were investigated but not indicted.
Okay.
Some privacy.
Right.
After you passed away, you have no privacy. It's the opposite of don't speak ill of the dead. It's you have no interest in your reputation. So they keep track. I mean, most Watergate people, other than me, have passed away. Well, that's not true. That's not true. John Dean is still alive, and two of the lead prosecutors are still alive.
Does he talk about it, John Dean?
Oh, yeah. He talks about it all the time. He's the hero. He's the purported whistleblower who was this innocent kid caught up with these evil people. But
That's the narrative he's just like sticking to the whole forever.
oh, yeah.
Ugh,
Well, with one exception, I'll get to in just a second.
okay.
The lead FBI agent, special agent in charge, from the day of the break-in arrests straight through to the conviction for the cover-up, Angelo Lano, did an oral history for the National Archives, 2009, I think. Not that long ago. And he said that he credits John Dean with 95% of the cover-up. And yet he goes scot-free. He
Right.
never spent a single night in jail. And Gordon Liddy, and I knew Gordon, didn't like him, but I knew him. Uh, Gordon spent 5 years in
Hmm.
jail. Now he planned it.
Right.
Uh, he would not cooperate with prosecutors, and they threw the book at him. Uh, but John Dean's very active. He wrote a book. He's written a lot of Watergate books, but he wrote one that was published in 2014. That's 10 years ago. And there's this infamous footnote, page 54. And it says, that smoking gun tape where Nixon agrees to get the CIA to tell the FBI not to interview these two people. That's been misunderstood from the beginning. This is John Dean's footnote. The lawyers misunderstood. He was trying to protect, or the people proposing it, the identities of two very prominent Democrats who'd
Mm,
contributed to Nixon's reelection campaign under the assurance it would never become public. And when they started tracing the money, they knew the burglars who had all these $100 bills,
yeah.
they'd gotten the money from Creep. But the FBI, being thorough, wanted to know how the money got to Creep in the first place.
Hmm.
That would have exposed these Democrat donors. And that was the reason they wanted the FBI not to interview them. The it actually postponed their interviews for a week, and after they were interviewed, they were determined to have no involvement whatsoever. And all this was known that the White House met with the CIA called the FBI. All that was known.
When you saw that video, right? Like you were one of the first people to watch that video.
The video with Angelo Lano,
Yeah, the
the FBI agent. Well,
no.
yeah, I mean, you know, well, it was taken in 2009. I happened to see it last year.
Okay.
I didn't know it existed. And there's a whole set.
I thought
Now,
the smoking gun video is the one that you had seen.
well, it's a tape recording. It's not a video.
Oh, no, I was confused.
But while we're there, I transcribed all the White House tapes as a young lawyer on the White House staff, and I was the third person to hear that particular tape of June 23rd, 1972. Uh, and I prepared the official transcript. And I'm the one that called it the smoking gun, but not because it was my conclusion. It was because my boss, the president's top lawyer, was appalled at what he had heard and mistakenly assumed it showed that Nixon was in on the cover up from day one.
Mm.
He wasn't. And today, I think it's pretty much agreed. Nobody on the White House staff. Now, you remember, there's the White House staff, and then there's CREEP, the reelection committee.
which are very different.
Oh, well, they happened to be kitty cornered across the street from each other, and it was staffed, creep, by former members of the White House staff or the Department of Justice for the main part. And they were very, very different, but the break-in was planned and executed by people who worked for Creep. And the people on the White House staff, Nixon, Haldeman, and Ehrlichman, and Colson, had no idea that this was planned. But John Dean was at two important meetings in Attorney General Mitchell's office where he heard about the plans.
Mm,
And so he was fearful he was going to get caught up. So he ran the cover up to protect himself.
of course.
And the White House thought he was protecting them, but in the course of his cover up, he infected members of the White House staff, and then he turned on them. Now let's go back over that very carefully. How did it all start? Well, it started when Bob Haldeman asked John Dean to prepare a campaign intelligence plan. Every campaign has one.
Hmm.
They call it opposition research. You want to know everything you can learn about your opponent. Where's his money coming from? What are his policy positions? Where's he going to speak tomorrow? Who doesn't like him? All those things.
Right.
Well, the trouble was John Dean hadn't been that involved in campaigns and didn't really know what he was doing. And he recruited and hired a guy named Gordon Liddy. Now, your viewers don't know Gordon, but I had worked with Gordon when I was a White House fellow at Treasury. And the nicest thing you can say about him is that he was very intense.
Mm.
Uh, I I prefer crazy as a loon. Just eager to go way beyond normal activities. And he prepared a campaign intelligence plan that was priced out at $1 million. This is 1972. And it envisioned mugging, bugging, kidnapping, and prostitution. And you can say, oh, Shepard, you're exaggerating. Everybody exaggerates. But Liddy wrote an autobiography 7 years after Watergate, and he describes his plan in loving detail. There's no question what he had in mind. It just happened to be illegal.
And he was FBI.
Former FBI, but he'd
Okay.
been on from the FBI
Okay.
some time. Um, he worked for the district attorney up in Dutchess County, New York, and he's kind of a local celebrity because he fired off a starting pistol in court, scared the daylights out of people.
Yeah.
And he was,
I bet.
and he did. He ran for Congress, and he lost in the primary, but he threatened to run as a conservative in the conservative party. New York's got some splinter parties, and it was a district where the congressman was Hamilton Fish, I think. And they decided to buy Liddy off. So they said, if you don't run and we win in 68, we'll give you a federal job. Now, you're not supposed to
Mm,
do that.
right.
That's got nothing to do with Nixon. That was New Yorkers. That was Rockefeller's people.
Oh, good.
No.
I've done
So,
some research into the Rockefellers.
well, they have good and bad points.
Yeah.
Healthy, well. Um, so Liddy ends up as a special assistant to the Secretary of Treasury, and I was assigned to Treasury as a White House fellow. And he's a gun nut. And I believe in the Second Amendment, but he's way over the line. And of course, he's reporting to the Assistant Secretary for Enforcement.
Mm,
And he's got under him the Bureau of Customs, the Secret Service at Treasury, and ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which regulates firearms and is detested by the gun lobby. So Gordon would go out and give speeches on how he was going to protect the gun lobby when his sister organizations were ATF. And they said, you got to stop this. You can't go out and do this stuff. And he wouldn't listen, so he was going to get fired. And my boss on the White House staff uh, was in charge of the law and order issue, among many other things, and had good friends at the Department of Justice. And they liked Gordon because Gordon so hated his job at Treasury, he would tell the Department of Justice how they were messing up.
Mm.
Treasury had customs, they're after drugs.
Yep.
The Department of Justice had the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, they're after drugs. Law enforcement.
They're like
And
fighting each other for the
well,
cases.
the competition got to be so intense. There was one instance where they drew down on each other
Oh my
because
goodness.
they were following different aspects of this smuggling routine. So Gordon's going to get fired, and my boss, Bud Krogh, gets convinced to hire Gordon just to thumb our nose at the Treasury.
Mm.
And so we did. And I was so opposed. I'm just a kid, you understand?
Right.
I'm 24 when I joined the White House staff. But I threw such a hissy fit that Bud said, let's set aside a half hour. Let's go across the street to Noni's coffee shop, and you can make your pitch against Gordon with no interruption. So he heard me out. And my pitch was that Gordon might be a good field general, but you couldn't trust him at headquarters because he didn't follow instructions. But I lost. So we hired Gordon. And then John Dean hires him to do this campaign intelligence plan.
Did John Dean know how crazy Liddy was?
No, no, no. In his book, he talks about meeting him and he looked, he looked very presentable in a vested suit. And I remember the suit. It was a Glen plaid summer weight with a vest, and Liddy looked, he spoke well. He had conducted what's called the plumber's break-in
Mm-hmm.
before 1971. Ehrlichman was appalled at the idea they had broken into a psychiatrist's office. They'd instructed Bud that Gordon had to go. Get him off your staff.
Right.
So John Dean comes around looking for people to help him with his campaign intelligence plan. Gordon says, Bud says, I got somebody for you.
He's like trying to offload this weight.
Oh, yeah, no question about it.
He's like, here, just
But,
take this guy off my hands.
but just to personify this, just for a second, I really did pitch a hissy fit, and I lost. And then Gordon, in his book, he says when he shows up on the White House staff, Geoff Shepard was assigned to show him around, teach him the ropes, Welcome aboard, Gordon. Well, then Gordon does this break-in that I don't know about in Louis Fielding's office, Daniel Ellsberg's shrink.
Yeah.
And remember, Ellsberg linked the
Leaked to
Pentagon.
the Pentagon Papers. Yeah.
So Gordon's supposed to leave. He goes over to the reelection committee. And I remember walking down the hallway of the old EOB, gorgeous old building next door to the White House, saying to myself, Gordon's been here, and now Gordon's gone, and nothing's gone wrong. Your friends must think you're nuts to have raised such a hue and cry about Gordon. And
Oh
then
man.
there's the Watergate break-in. They get arrested. This is June 17th, 72.
Can we talk
And
about that for a second? The
well, let me
burglary.
finish my
Oh,
little story, and
yeah.
then you go ahead.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
at 81, I proceed slowly. So the newspapers start speculating about somebody who planned the break-in but wasn't caught red-handed. Who's caught red-handed? Four Cubans and the CIA wireman, James McCord.
Right.
But they start speculating about who else it might be. And my secretary's roommate was the secretary to the plumbers unit where Gordon worked and when he was on the White House staff. So Joanne, Kathy was her name, Joanne says, well, you know who it is, this unknown person. I said, no, I'm really not that worried about it. I got a full plate of other stuff.
Right.
I'm just plodding along. I'm busy. She says, let me give you his initials.
Oh man.
And she says, GGL. It doesn't make any sense. Who
Yeah.
cares? And then she says, Gordon, G. Gordon. And I go, oh no, oh no. And then all the memories of trying to keep me out of there come flooding back. And Gordon's got us into huge trouble with
Yeah.
this campaign intelligence plan. Now, go to your question.
So it seems like they get caught or they have this lookout, right? And the lookout was like, hey, there's police.
Alfred Baldwin.
And they just like ignored the fact that there were police. And they just kind of like kept going until they were caught. And then they like the police come in, they're caught, and they're like, oh yeah, we're guilty. And they just like give up with no fight. They didn't call in any
Well,
favors. They didn't
they
call
didn't
like
shoot.
were they trying to get caught?
Oh, yeah. No, no, no. Well, one, I know nothing. I know nothing about. I've read some stuff. I have views, but they may or may not be better than anybody else's view.
Mm,
Everybody involved in the break-in itself had some connection with the CIA. James McCord, who's the wireman, was a career CIA official.
right. Then you have all
Howard
the
Hunt,
Cubans.
well, yeah, we had the four Cubans, uh, who a couple, they were all consultants to the CIA, and Howard Hunt had been the infamous Eduardo during the Bay of Pigs when we were preparing a
Right.
private army to go. So there's a lot of speculation, a lot of books, and I call them the doubter books because they doubt conventional wisdom.
Mm,
And the most influential is one by Jim Hogan. I think it came out in the late 70s called um, Hidden Agenda.
mm,
And then there was one by Len Kolodny called Silent Coup. And Silent Coup dumps more on John Dean. Secret Agenda covers the CIA involvement because he'd written a previous book called Spooks. And he raises all these questions. So the police car, the janitor calls in because the tape.
right.
Well, why was the tape put around the edge of the door instead of on the thin side where it would
Right.
disappear?
Which
Why,
the first time they did it like that. And then this time they did it differently.
why did they do it again? Why on earth did
Right.
McCord replace the tape? He didn't tell the others. So the theory I'm attracted to says the Cubans were sent in to photograph and uh, uh, take pictures of what was going on. McCord was supposed to plant microphones. Remember this, the second entry,
Yes.
to plant the microphones and get his ass out before the cops came and arrested the Cubans. That it was a part of a scheme to be arrested by, in theory, the CIA who didn't like Nixon. Now, the CIA didn't like Nixon, but I believe that the CIA knew what was underway, uh, and they chose not to warn the president that it was underway. But if you think about it, who would they tell? Because the president's best friend, John Mitchell, and his attorney general, was said to have approved the plan. So who's the CIA supposed to sidle up to and say,
Right.
So we don't know. We don't know for sure. But The cops show up because there was a unassigned car with plainclothesmen in an unmarked car where the guy shouldn't have been there anyway. And when the call came through, he from the back seat grabbed the microphone and said, "We're on it. We'll go take care of it." So this car pulls up middle of the night.
Right.
Robert Baldwin is across the street in what was at that time the Howard Johnsons, and his walkie-talkie doesn't work because the batteries were fouled up.
Mm.
So he can see the guys on I think it's the sixth floor, but he can't warn them. And then lights go on in the DNC offices, and the cops come in, and the people come out with their hands up, and they're in suits and they have on rubber gloves, and 4 out of 5 are Cubans. They expected to be sprung that night. There's this story about one
Hmm.
of the Cubans saying to the police, saying, we're both on the same side. I mean, we're the good guys. And
Right.
soon you'll get a phone call saying, let us go.
That's what
But
I was curious about too. Like they didn't call anybody. Like they have all these CIA connections and they're connected to the creep, like the re-election campaign. They didn't make any phone calls to be like, "Hey, come get us. We got caught."
yeah, well, there's this guy named Douglas Caddy, who is general counsel of Mullen and Company, which is thought to be a CIA front, and employed Howard Hunt.
Hmm.
And the theory is Hunt nearby, maybe in the Watergate office building, but not caught. And Gordon, same thing. There's somebody who streaks out the door and they don't know who it is, but they assume it was either Hunt or Liddy.
Hmm.
And they go wake up Doug Caddy and say, you got to get these guys out of jail. Go down and represent them. The Cubans didn't know who he was, didn't know where he came from, but they were happy for help. Gordon, not Gordon, somebody approaches Dick Kleindienst on the golf course at country, the Congressional Country Club, and says, Mitchell wants you to call him and wants you to get these guys out of jail. This is a message from John Mitchell. You were deputy, now you're attorney general. This is your predecessor. You'll do what he asks. And Kleinding said, if John Mitchell wants to call me, he'll call me. He's not sending a message through the likes of you, but he doesn't report that contact. If he had
Oh.
reported that to the people down in the bowels of DOJ, his career prosecutors, Watergate would have ended much sooner. But because there was this massive cover up, um, seeking to protect John Dean, Jeb Magruder, who headed the campaign committee waiting for Mitchell
Hmm.
and Mitchell. Those are pretty senior people.
Yeah.
Let me,
And Mitchell being like Nixon's best friend and like
oh
them
yeah,
being like attorneys together before they were
yes,
like in office.
same law
Yeah,
firm.
so
Big.
like
I mean, Mitchell was
if
the
he's
guy who
involved, then Nixon
brought
being
them
involved makes
together.
a lot of sense.
Yep. Now, there was something else I was going to say about. Oh, Liddy shows up at Creep on December 10th, 1971, and says to Jeb Magruder, who's acting head, waiting on Mitchell, I've been promised $1 million to do a campaign intelligence plan. Now, Jeb is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. So Jeb says, well, that may be, but nobody here has the authority to approve $1 million. Only John Mitchell can approve that kind of expenditure, and he's still over at DOJ. So they go over to talk to John Mitchell on January 27th, 1972. Gordon has charts prepared by the CIA describing Gemstone, his series of surreptitious entries and kidnapping and all that, because of a budget issue, because Jeb can't approve $1 million budget. And you sit there and say, you understand, the whole government came down
Right.
because this dumb fool creeps. Oh, only Mitchell can approve this. This shooting. I mean, it's a money issue. And it's just the Watergate's filled with those kinds of little vignettes that if you didn't live through it, you can't fully appreciate how bizarre they really are.
Well, and then you have like the 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 journalists, right? That they're like being fed this information
Oh yeah,
by Mark Felt from the FBI.
yes, yes. It's Woodward and Bernstein mainly, but
Hmm.
I'm blocking on Seymour Glanzer out of
Mm.
the New York Times and Woodward and Bernstein off the Post, um, and all kinds of mystery about how Woodward knows Felt. But Felt's identity is kept secret till about 2004 on this same tape with Angelo Lano, the FBI agent. The questioner says, weren't you helped by Woodward and Bernstein? And he says, no, not a single bit. They were printing what we already knew. And the questioner says, yeah, but didn't they give you some leads? And he says, no, not a one. Did we give them leads? Oh, hundreds. But Woodward and Bernstein, you call them the greatest investigative reporters of all time.
No way.
They were reporting what the government already knew. The public didn't know. But the government was leading the investigation. It was very thorough, and uh, they had hundreds of FBI agents working on that.
So
It took
did they do this? Were they fed the information to sway the court of public opinion because Nixon was winning by a landslide. This guy would like this was a huge win for Nixon for
oh
his
yeah,
second term.
huge. But you got to get this. You got to get the dates straight. Two things. Nixon was going to wipe McGovern out without question. But the Democratic convention had not yet been held.
Oh,
Summer in Miami. It's there. He's talking with Mitchell about bugging Larry O'Brien's suite down at this Miami hotel. And Mitchell says, be sure you get the bugs out before I go down because the Republicans are coming in next. He's kind of kidding about it.
right.
But Nixon had already had one election stolen from him in 1960 by Jack Kennedy and his people and Mayor Daley of Chicago. And then they thought they'd run Robert against him, but Robert got assassinated too, and they're down to Teddy. And Teddy's damaged goods. He's 14 years younger than the brothers. He's arrested 3 times for drunk driving at UVA. He's thrown out of Harvard College for hiring somebody to cheat on his Spanish exam. He's a real weak leak, but he's the last Kennedy. Okay. Joe dies in the war.
Right.
Jack and Bobby are assassinated. You're down to Teddy. And the theory was Nixon feared Teddy would skip all the primaries leading up to the convention because of Chappaquiddick and Mary Jo Kopechne drowning that
Right.
girl.
Yeah.
And he would skip the primaries where he might lose, but emerge at the convention as the great hero. the Kennedy, the restoration of Camelot. So Nixon was much more anxious than his staff. This is a metaphor, but he grabbed people in the hallway by their lapels and said, "You're not taking this seriously. You don't understand the Kennedys. I
Right.
lost once. I'm not going to lose again." So there was an intense concern about the Democrat Party.
I could see that.
And then there was another issue that escapes me, but it'll come up as we continue to talk. Um, nope, don't have it.
That's okay. So we have the burglary, right? And then we have this cover up that John Dean is like leading this cover up
Oh,
because
I
he wants
know,
to
I
save his
know,
own
I
butt.
know, I know.
Okay.
Wait, I know. Why did they bug the DNC headquarters? Everybody knows the real information was out with the campaigns. Why didn't they bug McGovern? Why didn't they bug the guy from Maine? And the answer, it's in Earl Silbert's diary. Earl Silbert, the lead prosecutor, the career prosecutor who broke the cover up, one of the few real heroes in Watergate. He says, well, one, they tried to infiltrate McGovern's campaign a couple of times and couldn't do it.
Hmm.
Two, the assumption was after the convention, which is going to occur in a week or two, after the convention, McGovern will take over the DNC headquarters in the Watergate Hotel, and we'll already have our bugs in place. So with that, that's not as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe there was some method in their madness. Now back to your questions.
So I was gonna move on to the cover up because we have John Dean
Yeah,
like
sure.
trying to cover all this up, and that actually like pushes the narrative more that
Dude,
Nixon and his administration is involved.
two things. He sits in on all the FBI interviews of important people.
Mm.
And Lano says on this same, did you really ought to listen to the interview, um, Lano's oral history. He says we could tell because we interview somebody, and half the time they'd be in John Dean's office for the interview, that they'd been coached. They weren't telling us what stuff first string. They'd already reviewed all that stuff with Dean. So we knew he was running it from day one. And ordinarily, the FBI would never allow a lawyer to sit in on an interview. But this was the White House, and he was the president's lawyer. Then what happens? Cover up collapses. Dean's been running it, and he decides, well, Magruder, who is the main reason for the cover up, there are two main reasons for the cover up. Magruder's a very weak read, and they if they can shut it off at Gordon Liddy, that Gordon's crazy, one, it's probably true, and Liddy will be Magruder will be protected, and two, they've got to prevent disclosure of the earlier break-in out in the Beverly Hills offices of Daniel Ellsberg's shrink, because it's the same people.
Yeah.
That break-in is has the appearance of being authorized directly from the Oval Office. So that's not, oh, it's that campaign. That's when the Pentagon Papers leaked. Nixon said, spare no expense, spare no effort. Go find out what this guy's going to do. This Ellsberg guy, he has access to 54,000 pages of other classified documents as a consultant for Rand Corporation out in Santa Monica.
How did he not get arrested for leaking all of that?
He was. He was
Okay.
arrested. The case is brought out in Los Angeles.
Mm.
Big case. Takes a while for these things to gin up. And it's presided over by Judge Matthew Byrne, Byrne. Good judge. Used to be an FBI agent. So when we get rid of Pat Gray as head of the FBI, the acting head of the FBI, he can't be confirmed. Uh, he gets up there up for confirmation, and he admits he has given John Dean 81 different investigative reports
Oh my
prepared
goodness.
by the FBI. He's leaking to the president's lawyer, who's leaking to the defendant's counsel.
Hmm.
So Pat Gray's gone. He's done. Got to find another guy. We asked the Department of Justice. I was in this because I did Law and Order. We're related very closely to people at DOJ. Who you got in mind? Who's the best person? Well, it's this judge out in California named Matthew Byrne. Trouble is, he's presiding over the Ellsberg prosecution for leaking the Pentagon Papers. And I tell John Ehrlichman that. So we can't talk to him.
Right.
And John says, oh, yes, we can. I'm not waiting till that trial's over to pick the next FBI guy. We got to get somebody in line. So they're out at San Clemente, the Western White House,
Hmm.
and he meets with Byrne. He meets with the judge presiding over the Ellsberg trial. But they don't talk about the Ellsberg trial. They ask about his interest in being head of the FBI. And he's interested. He wants to think
Perfect.
about it, but he's interested. So Ehrlichman brings him back and introduces him to Nixon, who's out there at the Western White House. Well, when that leaks, all hell breaks loose, and Byrne has to step down as judge. What he does is dismiss the case because we had overheard Ellsberg on a wiretap that Henry Kissinger had demanded of somebody else on the National Security Council, a guy
Hmm.
named Mort Halperin, who happened to write the Pentagon Papers. There's three people at the Department of Justice who are the three most senior anti-Vietnam War officials at DOJ. Paul Warnke, who's general counsel, Mort Halpern, who's one of the thinkers, and a PR guy named Les Gelb. And they authorized this giant secret study. Nobody at the White House knows they're reviewing it. Nobody at the Department of State. It's not peer reviewed, this Pentagon Papers report. It's done by people who hate the war. And Les Gelb prepares the summaries. And if we had a moment, I could show you the report. It's 4 volumes of
Wow.
printed up,
Yeah.
48 notebooks, everything starting in 1945 forward. Uh, uh, but and they've got dozens of Army people working on preparing this report. And they divide it up, and there's the World War II involvement, there's the Geneva Accords, there's this, there's that. It stops with Lyndon Johnson, doesn't go into Nixon.
So
So
then why did this look bad on Nixon then?
let me finish. Let's
Okay.
go. Hold the thought. So Gelb summarizes different parts of the report. And so he's really, you don't want to read 4 volumes. So, and it's posted on NARA's website. So you can go see the Pentagon Papers. It's all declassified today. You could
Perfect.
read it. You had nothing else to do. But what you do is you go and you print out the executive summaries. And that'll end up with a stack about this high instead of 4 volumes.
Well, I mean, it's better.
Yes. And what's interesting, I've read his summaries. He's summarizing work prepared by different people, different officers in the Army. And if they liked the president, they're kind to him. If they didn't like that particular president, They're not kind to him. And Geoff
Interesting.
is trying to summarize this. So they liked Eisenhower. And if you read the summary of going into the Geneva Accords, coming out, Eisenhower's treated very fairly. So's Jack Kennedy. But then you get to Lyndon Johnson and they just dump all over him. It's all Lyndon's fault. And again, it's not peer reviewed.
Hmm.
It's not the official view of the Pentagon. It's the anti-war view of three Pentagon officials. So that's what leaks. You had another question.
Yeah, so all this is leaked during Nixon's first term. Why is he so concerned about it? Like if it doesn't really have anything to do
Oh,
with
of course,
him.
of course. It's leaked on June 17th, 1971. Okay. June
Hmm.
17th keeps coming up
Yeah.
because that's a break-in date too. And the beginning reaction is, who cares? It's all Lyndon. It stops with us.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we'll come out looking better. And Kissinger throws a hissy fit. Kissinger says, listen, I am negotiating in secret with three totalitarian regimes, Russia, China, and North Vietnam. If they conclude we can't keep a secret, they won't talk. It's just like today.
Right.
We are meeting with Iran. Well, yes, we are meeting with Iran. No, we're not meeting with it. And you're sitting there, you've got back channels apparently today through Pakistan, maybe through Spain too, or somebody else.
Right.
Pakistan is always eager to be a facilitator. But it's the same situation back then. Now, why was it top secret? Well, they would describe some event. We heard from the ambassador to Vietnam, our ambassador, that we should do something or we were going to do something. And it is an encrypted communication that comes back to us that is broadcast, but our enemies can't break the code.
Hmm.
Well, with the Pentagon Papers, they would tell you about all the stuff that was going on. And then, at least according to Gordon, they attached the memo in question in the last four notebooks. So you
Oh.
had hundreds and hundreds of pages of highly classified documents. And if your opponents had the document, they could break the code because they had the encrypted. Now it's the Rosetta Stone. I mean,
Right.
people do this, and so it one of the two plumbers, Bud Krogh and David Young. David comes from the NSC. Bud comes from the Domestic Council. David told me he's a good friend. He just died maybe 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
He said, Geoff, people died because the Pentagon Papers leak. It exposed networks of spies and
Mm.
secret government helpers across the world.
So
And
that pissed off the like deep
huge.
state.
Well, yes, of course it did, but they hated Nixon too. So you've got this back and forth. Uh, the media loved it. The New York Times,
Of course.
Prince. It's a very if you get a hold of the page, the front page of the New York Times, there's a color picture of Trisha's wedding to the Cox kid,
Hmm.
David. I'm not Cox. David Eisenhower
Okay, okay.
in color, and then below the fold, there's the first leak of the Pentagon Papers. Yes, rather
Yeah.
historic issue of the New York Times. They try to stop it in advance. They want to stop papers from printing it again because they think people are going to die. It is alleged to be the biggest national security leak since World War II. And the district judge says, no, 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 there's no Official Secrets Act. There's no prior restraint.
Mm.
And 29 different judges, district court, different newspapers start. They shut down the New York Times, then the Post starts. They shut down the Post, the Miami Herald starts. It's what I call whack-a-mole
With
stuff.
the different papers like
That's
posting. Yeah.
what these judges would say is you can't do that. You can't prevent it. You can indict them for causing damage, but you can't prevent publication. But I will issue a temporary restraining order while you appeal.
Mm.
So they were stopping, and then somebody else would pop up more, and they'd stop there, and somebody else would pop up more. And the only judge out of D.C. who refused to grant a temporary staying order was Judge Gerhard Gazelle. He's not particularly notorious, but he's the one that presided over the later Plummer's trial. So
Oh,
here's this guy who was involved in it from the beginning, and then we're going to add a different point at this point. My book's about Watergate.
right.
Show secret meetings between prosecutors and judges, suppression of exculpatory information, and changing of stories by witnesses that's not shared with defense. I'm currently working on my fourth and last book about the plumbers.
Okay.
And what is so interesting, I even have a draft right here,
Oh man.
first draft, uh, uh, different issue, plumbers in Watergate, different lawyers working for the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, different task forces, same secret meetings with the judges, same suppression of exculpatory information, same situation of witnesses changing their story
Mm.
and that not being shared with defense counsel. It's called a Brady rule violation. Let
Right.
me just
Yeah.
explain that for your viewer just for a second. If you flip, you're a bad guy. You're one of six. They're covering down. You conclude you'd better be the first to flip, you get a better deal.
Right.
And then having flipped, your new best friend is the prosecutor because he's going to determine what they say to the judge about how helpful you've been. So you start to polish your story to please your new protectors.
Right.
And that's very human and it's very well known. So the rule is if a witness changes their story in the hands of the prosecutors must share that with defense counsel. So defense counsel says, you said you were last in, and yet before the Congress, you said you were first in.
Mm.
And so the question is, were you lying then or are you lying now? We don't care which it is, but the fact of the matter is you lie.
Right.
And so they hid that in both of these major trials, the cover-up trial and the Plumbers trial, witnesses changed their stories.
And they didn't
And
talk about it.
no, they didn't share that with defense, but I've uncovered the memos that document the changes. See, about 2003, I learned the Special Prosecution Force, specially recruited, highly partisan, they were government employees.
Right.
So their records are at National Archives if they survive. A lot of the top people took their records with them, prosecutors. Four
Right.
top prosecutors took their records with them. Not supposed to do that, but they did.
Mm.
But
Because they didn't want anybody to know what was in their records.
hell no, they didn't want that known. The memos confirming secret meetings with the judges.
Yeah.
Memos saying how can you indict this guy? He's not guilty. Well, we want to break the government hold. You know, we know what we want to do. Uh, uh, and 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 those records, those internal records, official government documents. There's no
Yeah.
question as to their authenticity. They first began to surface in 2013.
Wow.
2013,
That's
Jaworski is the second special prosecutor, is the key. Takes all his records, goes back to Texas, finishes his career. He heads up a big firm, Fulbright and Jaworski,
oh
down
wow.
in
Good for him.
Houston. Uh, and when he dies, he gives his papers to his alma mater, Baylor Law School in Waco, Texas. And they sort through them and get them ready to make them available. And they become available about 2013. And somebody else is down looking. And they say, these are grand jury transcripts. You can't have these. So Archives goes down, fetches all these, and goes through it. I was told they had an all hands on deck effort to redact the names of people who investigated but not indicted. And I had a FOIA request pending about something else. And the head of this special access section said, Geoff, that these papers aren't particularly responsive to your FOIA request, but we just finished clearing them and we want to get them out to the public. So we're going to make them available to you. So I'm down there and I got to drive from my house outside of Philly down to Archives 2, Roman numeral 2, which is in College Park, Maryland.
Okay.
And it takes me about 3 hours. It's rush hour to Philly,
Mm,
out of Wilmington, out of Baltimore,
yeah.
into Washington. It's a big project. And I was going down to prove something else in my mind, find documents that showed something that I was interested in. And what you do, you take what's called a flatbed scanner. And if you look right off my right
Mm,
shoulder under the picture, that there's a flatbed scanner there. It doesn't curl the document. The scanner moves like the old Xerox machines. You know, the document
yep.
is held and then the scanner. So you won't hurt the document.
Perfect.
And in a full day's stay, I could scan approximately 400 pages, but I couldn't read them. You'd look, here's a memo, here's a 5-page memo, quick decision, scan or don't scan. And then when you're scanning page one, you can read a couple sentences of page two, you flip.
Right.
Takes about a half minute to complete the scan of one page. I'm driving home. This is 2013. I'm talking to a good friend, former assistant attorney general at the department. And I say, it was a wasted trip. I didn't uncover the documents I wanted on this other topic. Then I get home and you print out all the documents. You put them in order. Because they aren't in order when you got them.
Oh, okay.
They're usually backwards by the calendar because you keep putting stuff in the next month and it gets fouled up. And highlight the dates and get them in order and everything else. And then, son of a gun, these guys were meeting secretly with a judge. It's right there in black and white. I mean, so my second book, The Real Watergate Scandal, you see, that's over my other shoulder. I can't do this with a screen. It's right. Uh, I'm left-handed, so everything gets fouled up. Uh, that's based primarily on documents from Jaworski's confidential Watergate files. Meeting with the judges, discussion with the attorneys about who to hold responsible and why, how to phrase the cases. Uh, it's fascinating to me, but it's for all outward appearances, it's the same thing going on today with Trump.
Right.
You've got 5 different assaults on Trump the person, trying to convict him of criminal and civil cases where it turns out they're tempted to take shortcuts and reinterpret statutes and cause new law. Um, there are four phrases today, popular today, that didn't exist during Watergate: deep state, fake news, false narrative, and most of all, lawfare.
Mm.
The misuse of the criminal law to destroy your political opponent. Well, I maintain all those things existed during Watergate.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have those terms. And what's changed everything is people today are willing to consider the idea that these specially recruited Watergate prosecutors hated Nixon so much, they cut corners. And they're willing to listen to my pitch that this is what was going on. Now, as I say, these internal documents have come to light since 2013. So they've been out a dozen years,
Hmm.
reproduced, see them on my website. They're in the appendix to all of my books. Not one single document has ever been challenged by anybody as inauthentic or misunderstood, saying not what Shepard says it says. No one. There's absolute silence from the other side. But what's picking up is podcasts by people like you saying, we ought to take another look at this. We ought to take another look at this. So I've written 3 books,
Hmm.
produced 2 documentaries, and a off-Broadway stage play, all with roughly the same theme. There are these documents that have come to light that change everything. And as I just showed you, I'm just starting on a book about the Plumbers. The Plumbers is a lesser known prosecution, but same games,
It
same
was it
secret
just
meeting.
overshadowed by Watergate? Like, do you think that the Plumbers would have been bigger if Watergate hadn't happened?
Yes, they were huge on their own, but present a totally different question. Um, we have this little thing called the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution,
Hmm.
prohibiting the government from unreasonable search and seizure. Okay. So you got to have a judge's order to go into your house.
Right.
Got to be specific where they can look, when they can look, all that stuff. So those are search warrants.
Yes.
Government can't do that unreasonably. They can't come into your house without a judicially approved search warrant. But as the argument goes, the president is also commander in chief responsible for protecting America from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Does the president's responsibility as commander in chief give him the authority in certain instances where national security is involved to break in without a warrant? They don't have to go to a judge. This is too important. It's moving too quickly. The bad guy is moving between 4 houses and we don't know who's coming up next. We got to move now. Okay. Is that okay?
It feels like an abuse of power to me.
It should. Uh, uh, so the way that issue is presented is there a national security exception to the Fourth Amendment? Okay.
No.
There is.
I mean, right, there is, but like,
No,
I
no,
don't think
no,
there
no,
should be.
no. But you see, that's the plumber's case. They broke into Ellsberg Shrink's office without a warrant. Okay, that's the violation. They violated the Fourth Amendment
Yeah.
unless there's national security. And as I said, It was the biggest national security leak since World War II. He had access to 54,000 other classified documents. Somebody had just leaked the United States backup position for the SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks Treaty. We were being picked to death. Nixon said, "You've got to stop this. You've
Right.
got to stop it." Immense pressure. One of the meetings, they held the meetings where they created this plumbers unit. They held the meetings in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing, right across the hall from the Oval Office. And they leaned hard on these government bureaucrats,
Mm.
the FBI and the CIA and the Department of Defense. Ellsberg was a Department of Defense guy. What's going on? How did he get this stuff? Why didn't you know? They were told in one of those meetings by the FBI that a full set of the Pentagon Papers had been delivered to the Soviet embassy on the same day the New York Times printed the excerpt.
Oh my goodness.
It is big stuff.
Yeah.
So they got prosecuted in the Plumbers trial for violating the Fourth Amendment. Okay, you went in without a search warrant. The difficulty is that for the previous 4 decades, the position of the Department of Justice was, well, of course, there's a national security exemption.
Of course.
We go in when we damn well please.
Right.
And
Because they like that law.
well, hell, I mean, let's go have a look. Now there are 800 federal judges, give or take some. Not all of whom even have a national security clearance.
Mm.
They can't even read this stuff. Why should we have to go to some yahoo in Minnesota and get his permission to go protect our
Right.
nation?
But at
Right?
the same time, here's a question. Why do they break into his psychiatrist's office instead of breaking into like his home or something, which makes more sense? This
Well,
psychiatrist, he's got a lot of patients, not just Ellsberg.
you know, we should do duets more frequently. Because when the break-in was not successful and they did not find an Ellsberg file, they recommended breaking into his home. That was their comeback.
You
And
guys are so dumb. Like, just start there.
Erlanger said, enough of this shit. Get Liddy off your staff. Out of here. So he foisted him onto the reelection campaign. I want to go back to 4 decades of there being a national security
Yes.
exception. One of the most significant Watergate reforms after we sent everybody off to jail was the creation of a committee to go have a look at what the government had been doing. And it's called the Church Committee. It's the special Senate Select Committee on Domestic Intelligence.
Hmm.
And they held hearings and they reviewed. And it was a different era. Hoover had died. J. Edgar Hoover had died.
Yeah.
Richard Helms, the CIA head, had been relieved and reassigned as our ambassador to Iran.
Hmm.
The people who were left behind actually responded to subpoenas from the Church Committee. And they asked them for all kinds of documents. And then they produced a report, happen to have it right here.
Look at that.
Book 2 of the Intelligent Activities and Rights of Americans, final report of the Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with respect to intelligence activities. And they lay out chapter and verse of what we've been doing for 4 decades. All right, laid out there for the world to see.
It's a game plan.
Yeah.
And they're just like following it
Yeah,
over and over and over.
this is what we've done. We don't do this anymore because we're telling you we used to do this.
Hmm.
That church committee geared up within 1 year of the plumber convictions. So you're appealing this case where these Republicans broke into Fielding's office,
Hmm.
and you're holding extensive hearings. The government had done this for 4 decades. Same situation.
Yeah.
And nobody says, well, wait a sec, how come you didn't tell? Why weren't we informed? Why didn't we know this at the trial? Never comes up. Now, there was a guy named Phil Heyman, Harvard law professor. They all go to Harvard.
Of course they do.
He came with Archie Cox, and he felt, as a matter of policy, just like you feel, that there is no exception.
Right.
The government's been doing it, but the government's wrong. So he argued in the plumber's case and in related cases, perjury by Bud Krogh, one of the head plumbers, other spin-outs from this intrusion, and the appeals. He argued there was no such exception, that this was groundless to begin with. There was no exception. And you ask yourself, well, wait a second. What right does a specially recruited, highly partisan Democrat prosecutor have to argue that position as though it were the position of the Department of Justice, which it demonstrably was not,
Mm.
before an extraordinary liberal judge who ruled at the conclusion of the plumber's trial, any government review of your private papers is a per se violation of the Fourth Amendment without a court warrant. So you've got this, and I hate to dwell on it, but that's what I'm working
Right.
on right.
Yeah.
You have the Pentagon Papers, you have the Ellsberg break-in and the plumbers,
Hmm.
and then you have the church committee, which undercuts all that. And nobody gives a hoot. Nobody wants to raise that question because that would make Democrats look bad instead of Republicans.
The whole thing is so stupid. When it comes to politics, they're like, well, we need you to look bad. We can't look bad. And then all in all, like you're screwing over the people that you're supposed to be representing.
Well, it's all about power,
Right.
not issue. Take today, if we could, just for a second.
Absolutely.
Apparently, this morning at 2 a.m., we voted to fund DHS. Senate voted to fund DHS and went home. We'll see if the House concurs. Each side thought they had an absolute unassailable position. The Republicans wanted to fund the department. The Democrats, a little upset by long lines in the airports, wanted to fund TSA on a standalone basis.
Mm.
We said, no, it's all or none. They said, no, it's us. We got the votes. You may be in charge, but you don't have 60 votes. And then at the end, my understanding, we said, okay, let's fund TSA. This is crazy. And they said, no, that's not enough. We want to fund ICE. In addition,
Yeah.
we're winning the PR battle, and all those people in those lines are blaming you because we go out and say, you control the government. Now, you don't because you can't break the filibuster,
Right.
but the public doesn't know that, and the press won't write it that way. You're being blamed for the long lines. We're going to win the midterms. The longer this keeps up, it's going to destroy the economy. We'll blame you.
Yep.
It's going to cause massive disruption. We'll blame you. And the Republicans are sitting there saying, we're going to remember this one because this is nothing to do with good government. This is just all power. And that's human nature. And that's why our founding fathers divvied it up. 3 branches, checks and balances, smart people. They
Right.
couldn't solve everything, but my goodness, are we better situated than other countries?
The whole thing just blows my mind. Like, politics. the power that they feel like they need to have is crazy
Yep.
to me because at the end of the day, like you're affecting people's like day-to-day lives and we don't really care about your power. We care about like just paying our bills and
Issues,
like living our
issues,
lives.
yeah, but they all sanctimonious as can be,
Yeah.
pious, sit there, look you right in the eye. We had a reporter, uh, Virginia something or other here around Philadelphia, fast rising star, local station. Highly thought of. She ran her car off the road at the canal and drowned, but she was
Oh
a
man.
rising star before that. And one of the lines she was famous for, how'd you do it? How do you do so well? All you do is local news is you interview people whose kid has just fallen off the roof.
Right.
Local news at Gore. And she said, oh, once you get false sincerity down, you've got it made. It's all fake. It's all theater.
That's awful.
And they're actors. These are not distinguished people. We lost distinguished people right about the time of Watergate. There used to be really distinguished people who fought like mad during the day and went out for drinks with the opponent that night. I mean, it
Right.
was that they really did plan on good government, but no more. The other thing that
No.
happens, and I should really stop on this, what's caused the change since the year 2000 is there's a tie. When there's a tie, the House, the Senate, the White House could change in any given election.
Mm.
They're all at risk.
Yep.
And when there's a tie, you fight harder. You fight like mad because maybe just one more vote, one more story that dumps on the poor guy's wife or kid who got into a fight in high school, one more false accusation might swing enough that you could win.
Yeah.
Then you could be reasonable. Then you could be congressman for all the voters in your district. But you've got to beat that tie.
But
And
like
that's
if
not
you're willing to go that far, then you've already proven that you're going to go that far. So you're not going to come back and be like moderate now.
who did you have in mind who's not willing to go that far?
Everyone is willing to go like however far to
Better,
get the vote
right.
they need.
Maybe Fetterman, he seems to be voting in his conscience, driving the Democrats crazy. He's my senator, weird guy. Rand Paul, weird guy. Lisa Murkowski, I don't want voter ID because my people in Alaska live too far from the polling places. And you sit there and say, you're you're costing us a massive voter fraud. And you've got your stingy views about people living in rural Alaska. Well, she's sincere.
Those are her
All right,
people.
back to Watergate. Back to Watergate. There were certain Watergate reforms after everybody was sent off to jail.
Hmm.
One was called the Ethics in Government Act. I think it passed in 78 or 79. And it set up the independent counsel statute, independent prosecutor statute, which legitimatized what was done with Cox.
Okay.
Now, today, it's a judge down in Florida, I think her name is Cannon, who held that Geoff Smith and his whole group were illegitimate because they had not been confirmed by the Senate and they were not enforcing a specific law passed by the Congress.
Mm.
And that was her holding. Now, the Department of Justice withdrew the case before it was heard on appeal. But two attorney generals, ours, argued that it was really operating without legitimacy. Same situation with Watergate. Archie Cox, the first special prosecutor, was never confirmed by the Senate.
Mm.
The guidelines that ran the special prosecutor staff and gave them complete independence from the Department of Justice oversight, that was never passed by the Congress. It was done in a rump session by the Democrats led by Teddy Kennedy.
So how's
Uh,
this any how's any of this legal?
well, the argument today is it wasn't. In retrospect, that wasn't legal. Well, so were the due process violations. It used to
Right.
be, maybe not today, but used to be. Most Americans would agree, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how despicable the defendants, they got a fair trial. Then you'd hang them, but they got a fair trial.
Right.
Now, today, that's not quite the same thing because they want Trump derangement syndrome, get rid of him at any cost. The legalities don't matter. But that was the situation with Watergate. Convict them at any cost because they're evil. Nixon's evil. He conducted the war. I mean, there were 537,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam when Nixon took office. But Pat Moynihan, one of his top advisors, liberal Democrat, but neat guy, he said, the public doesn't blame you for the war, but they will if you don't make significant progress in 6 months in getting us out.
Right. Do something.
And Nixon wanted peace with honor. He wouldn't cut and run. So they started blaming him. And the Democrats who tolerated Lyndon Johnson's war were suddenly out posturing like mad against Nixon. It was a very, very tough time. We had this period that they call the unrest of the 1960s. And you hear that phrase.
Yeah.
It's really a 20-year period from 1960 to 1980 when there were three assassinations, Jack Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, Martin Luther King. There were riots in at least 19 major cities. No president completed 2 full terms.
Wow.
Jack Kennedy's assassinated.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson chose not to run. Nixon resigns. Ford was never elected to anything.
He just like took over for the 2 years and then
Well,
was
he was
gone.
appointed, yes. He was confirmed by the Congress, but he was,
Right.
and Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter served 1 term. It wasn't until we got to Ronald Reagan that we had a president serve 2 full terms.
Wow.
And
I
it's
guess I
just,
didn't realize that. Like,
oh, and you think it's nothing. It's, the unrest of the 60s. Well, we had a riot last night in Detroit, who cares? Man, there were bombings. There was the Symbionese Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, the Weather Underground. Uh, we're getting close, but it was much worse then. See
wow.
what happened? What happened was the Vietnam War, most unpopular war in our nation's history. One of the main reasons it was so unpopular was the military draft. Only applied to guys, only impacted guys born between 1940 and 1950 who
Mm,
became draft eligible at the height of the war.
right.
I'm in that group. I was born in 1944. I lived through this.
And didn't it like unfairly there was more like minors and not minors,
Minority.
minorities and like poor people that were drafted versus like people of
That is
affluence.
that is an accusation. It was not confined to minority. Women weren't involved, of course.
Right, of course.
Wasn't confined to minorities. Um, you every single male had to register at age 18. You had local draft boards, 4 or 5 people, uh, uh, prominent citizens, patriotic.
Mm,
A call would go out for more soldiers, and they would have a quota. You need to supply 25 people. And they came from a list of 1As. Those are eligible for draft. Or you could have a medical, or you could have an educational, or you could have uh, uh, a dependent exemption
Mm-hmm.
or a conscientious objector. But pretty much those were the five categories. Come now. You don't have to come because you're medically unfit. You don't have to come because you're in college. You don't have to come because you're married. You don't have to come because you're a conscientious objector.
Mm.
But we're talking tens of thousands of people. Everybody had this cardboard draft card, had to carry it with them. That's what you burned when you were opposing the war.
Yeah.
And it was like talking about your astrological sign. What's your draft status? How you doing? How about Bob? Whatever happened to Bob? Well, Bob failed a course in college and his draft board took him. Well, what about George? Well, George had a doctor's prescription saying he had flat feet, so he's okay. Well, what about John claiming conscientious objector? Well, that's a tough loop to fly through
Mm-hmm.
because it's so subjective. How do you prove to the draft board who wants you that you just assume not get shot at? Now, uniquely, we talked about the Quaker schools. Quakers have been pacifists from day one.
Mm-hmm.
So kids who went to Whittier with me had a real leg up if they wanted to claim CO status because they could say, having been here for 4 years, I've come to believe in Quaker pacifism. So I've lived it for 4 years. I've got knowledge about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a much better argument to make for uh, a tough thing to qualify. Whittier didn't have any ROTC units or anything like that. It was above the fray.
Right.
And I graduated in 66. 65 marks the first huge draft. The draft always existed since World War II, but they really started calling people up in 65. And to me, the only question was where you go, not whether you would go. So when I got back to law school back east, I joined ROTC. And it was very dangerous to be an ROTC at Harvard because the other students, the pasty-faced priest creeps, didn't like you. So most ROTC units in other colleges, you have to wear your uniform on drill day once a week.
Right.
You show up for class in a uniform, not at Harvard. We didn't have to, we didn't have to wear uniforms.
They're like, maybe don't do that.
We, we marched, we practiced in Soldiers Field, which is across the Charles River where the business school is. And to get from the law school to the river, you had to go through Harvard Square.
Yeah.
You did not want to go through Harvard Square with your fatigues on. That was not a wise thing to do. So we'd go as a group. See, we wouldn't march, but we would, get 6 or 8 guys to go through it, and they didn't hassle you then.
Right. Because
But
there's too many of you.
yeah, well, if you were, this was the time of Timothy Leary. You may have heard of him. He was a psychiatrist, and the phrase was tune in, turn on, drop out. And it was LSD and all the psychedelic drugs.
Mm.
Pat Moynihan told me once when we were on the White House staff together, and had been a Harvard professor. He said every single member of the faculty had one relative, one spouse or nephew or kid on drugs. That it was, so liberal
Wow.
and so unregulated. And he said they were everywhere. LSD and speed and amphetamines and uppers and downers. Hell, that's what Jack Kennedy did.
That's so crazy to me because, like, you think about the 60s, and that's like, kind of what you think about, right? Like the summer of love, everybody's hippies,
Yeah.
everybody's
Oh yeah.
on drugs. But then, like, it's funny that they have changed the narrative so much. They're like, yes, everyone was on drugs, everyone was happy, but like they so like cover up the fact that like we're having like presidents are not doing two
Right.
terms. Like we have this war that nobody like I mean, we talk about the Vietnam War, but not like as
No,
aggressive,
not knowing. The
right? Like
word, the word to this group of 10 years, 1940, 1950, if you got drafted, you were going to Vietnam. If you went to Vietnam, you weren't coming home. So to a lot of them, this was life or death.
yeah,
It wasn't just us kids, it was family and friends and girlfriends. Every decision you made because of the draft had to take into account its effect on the draft. If you dropped a course in college, you wouldn't be promoted to be a sophomore. Your draft board could claim you were not making satisfactory progress toward a degree. So you're draft eligible.
that's so scary.
If you took a summer off, if you got a D, if you were single, you were eligible to be drafted. If you got married, imagine the pressure.
It makes me wonder if that's why like there are a lot of really young marriages then, and also a lot of people like, is that the time that college became really popular and people started going because like
Yeah,
if I'm going to school, then I'm not going to I'm not being drafted.
right. Our professor of contracts at law school said, you many people here in class, first day of class, many of you don't really want to become lawyers. You're here for another reason. There are four professions. I remember the lecture very well. There are four professions: military, ministry, doctor, and lawyer. And lawyer is the least intrusive and the most to be able to use in a variety of ways.
Mm.
So lots of you aren't here to become lawyers. You're here to avoid being drafted. But we're going to teach you to think like a lawyer anyway. Don't think you're going to get let go or something. Um, we had lots and lots of students. I mean, it was one kid in high school. You had to register when you were 18. One kid didn't register. Okay,
What
he
happened
did
to
not
that
go
guy?
down. He hadn't been caught, but we all knew it. And then what's Bob going to do when they finally catch him? It's a felony. All the rest of us, we got that card. We got that silly card in our wallet. I mean, it was, do you, after a while, when they started running low on draftees, being married wasn't good enough.
Mm.
You had to have a kid. So they had a lot of young kids that were created for that same reason.
Yeah.
I had two roommates my sophomore year of college at Whittier. One fled to Canada, never came back, became a professor at the University of Saskatchewan. Thousands of people went to Canada.
So scary.
Many came back after the pardon, when Jerry Ford issued a pardon. The other one became a conscientious objector, and he was telling me how he was going to play it because he went to Whittier. That's the way, that's what, and it worked for him. He never served. And I joined ROTC, as I say, at law school. Then the faculty at Harvard College kicked ROTC off campus.
Because
They didn't,
they were so against it?
yes. Well, if you were in college, you wouldn't be drafted.
Right.
ROTC belonged to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, the college faculty. None of the students cared. They weren't going to be drafted out of college.
Hmm.
The ROTC unit was made up of kids who went to law school and the business school, because in many draft boards, colleges weren't, I mean, graduate school wasn't protected. And then one
Okay.
more story will stop. This because I'm working on this right now.
Yeah, no, I love that you're working on this because I feel like it gives like a like more of a perspective of what was happening at the time, why Watergate was like,
Right. Well, I'm debating whether to keep all my personal stories in my book. But law schools, in the beginning, didn't require you to have gone to college. You went to law school straight out of civilian life,
Okay.
and therefore you got an LLB, a Bachelor of Laws.
Mm.
If you went to college, you'd get a BA or a BS, a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. Some draft boards, again, getting down to the bottom of the barrel, they got to meet their quota. Took the position, you already have a bachelor's degree. You're going for a second bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Law.
Oh.
That's not making satisfactory progress. You're out of here. Okay? It really
Yeah.
happened. Well, there was this law school, the University of Michigan, the way I understand it, and they awarded the top 25% of their class a JD, a doctorate of law, Juris Doctor. And they, whether they had to write a paper or not, but you got a doctorate degree.
Yeah.
Well, word spread. And in 1 year, virtually every law school in the nation flipped and started issuing JDs to protect their students. And my class at Harvard, class of 1969, but it entered in 1966, is the first class to be awarded JDs. I mean, we were right at the cutting edge.
That's awesome.
Isn't that is
That's really cool.
some dippy little change, you know?
But it made a big deal. Like that was a big deal for a lot of people.
You bet it was. They even started selling them retroactively. You know, if you'd graduated the year before and you were afraid of being drafted, shit, we'll sell you a JD.
That's great. That's so funny. You're like, yeah, I just bought it.
But that shows you how all persuasive. And then in 1970, they institute the lottery. We're going to have a drawing, and it's your birthday, who's ever picked,
Mm.
or 1 through 365. Because of the drawdown from Nixon ending the war, they didn't need but about 5% of the draft eligible pool to maintain what they were doing as they were bringing troops home.
Hmm.
But everybody was scared shitless, excuse me, scared to death about being drafted. So the lottery broke the back of the opposition. They were only going to take the first 25 numbers, say, who got drawn. Not, I don't remember what my number was, but it was 200 or something. Nobody cared. Well, immediately, the opposition to the war effectively deflated.
Hmm.
Sorry about that 5% if you're in that group, but I'm home free.
Right.
See you around. See you around. I'm going to go break my engagement.
I'm not having kids anymore. Like
That's
this
right. I'm
lady, I was just gonna marry her because I
sending the
needed to
kid
not go to
back.
the
Yeah.
draft.
I'm getting out of this school. I'm going to take summer off. Yeah.
Oh man.
Freedom.
Jeff, when does your plumber's book come out?
I don't know, but
Okay.
usually it takes a year.
Okay.
I just what I showed you, I just assembled that yesterday
Oh wow.
because I was working on individual aspects. I researched most of it 5 years ago, but my agent said it's too soon for another book. You just came out with the Nixon conspiracy in 2021. Okay, so we were talking the other day, and he said enough time has passed. That book over here, there, the Nixon conspiracy. It's now sold 11,000 copies.
Wow.
It produced royalties, not big royalties, but royalties. 5 years after publication, and he said that's very rare. Your books have a timeless quality because Vietnam is 50 years ago, but still topical.
Hmm.
That book will probably be producing some kind of royalties for 10 years.
Wow.
And the book before it, the middle book on the shelf, published in 2015, it's still producing, I'm not talking big numbers, but it's still producing royalties. About half the inquiries I get to do podcasts like yours, they're keying off that second book. They don't even know about the third book. We've had poor marketing. But
I
in
went to
any
your
event,
website and I had seen it. But I didn't know about your books at all. Like I had told you before, like I had seen your interviews and then I was like, well, who is this guy? Right? Like I wanted to
yeah.
know more about you. And then I learned about your books and I learned about all the things. And so I didn't even find you from your books at all. I found you
Well,
from other podcasts.
take it from the other side, the bad guys who are heroes. I'm still so obscure. They don't have to respond to my accusations. They don't have to respond to my books. They'll ask John Dean. We have a mutual friend. They'll ask John, what about Shepard? And he'll go, well, he was a young. I vaguely remember him. He was a young lawyer on the White House staff, but I can't comment on it. I've never read his books. I can't comment on anything about them. But if somebody invites us both to be on the same program, oh boy,
Yeah.
John John won't come. John won't come.
Interesting.
Why
Because
give
your evidence is just so blatant.
well, and he owns the status quo. He was the hero of the Irvin Committee. He's this innocent whistleblower.
Hmm.
Why risk that when Shepard's not really making a lot of progress? Now, three books, fourth one, Littlefinger, fourth one, two documentaries. You probably haven't heard of the documentaries either.
Mm-mm.
We put one out, Watergate Secrets and Betrayals, the same day as the Tucker Carlson interview, which was the 50th anniversary of Nixon's resignation. That won an award on March 5th, okay?
Wow.
This month,
Yeah,
won
that's
an
amazing.
award from the Golden State Film Festival that's held at Grumman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And we were awarded Best Editing for a Feature Documentary, which means we think you presented your factual case quite well. And we're touting that
Yeah.
out around. Um, we'll see. After my second book came out, this guy contacted me and said, I want to write a play about your book. And I checked with my agent and they said, plays don't make any money, Geoff. So I said, yeah, but I got time. I'm not going anywhere. And so he wrote a play. And it took us 5 years. It's very hard to take a book, 300
Yeah.
pages, and reduce it to an hour and a half and introduce
All the characters.
the characters and the conversations.
Hmm.
A factual book doesn't have conversations; it has facts.
Right.
But you need to take a chapter and reduce it down to two scenes. And if somebody exits stage left, when they next appear, they got to come from stage left because there's no path behind the curtain to get to the other side. Oh, we spent and what we did, it was really it's fascinating stuff. We said we're going to give Nixon the impeachment trial in the Senate he never got. So the name of the play, which ran off Broadway in 2021, was called Trial on the Potomac,
Okay.
Impeachment of Richard Nixon. And it starred this Nixon impersonator, Rich Little. Rich made his career impersonating Nixon 50 years ago, but he'd never been in a Broadway play. He really wanted to do it. He's 80 and he did it anyway
Good for
for
him.
free.
That's
Came and
awesome.
he performs still in Las Vegas, moved to New York for six weeks, produced the play. Uh, we treated the audience as senators.
Okay.
The lights would dim and the voice would say, the Senate will come to order. Today's issue is the trial of Richard Nixon. There isn't going to be an intermission. The only vote that will be taken is at the end of the trial when you'll get to determine his guilt or innocence. And then we would run the trial, fake trial, as best we could hypothetically produce. It never occurred. He's in our play, he's been impeached by the House. This is the trial before the Senate. And fortunately, the Clinton, no, the Trump, first Trump impeachment came up.
Yeah.
So we had two examples of what to work from. And the only difference from Watergate forward was the documents I had uncovered came out during the course of the trial.
Okay.
And so we show the prosecutors have cheated and all that. And then the audience got to vote on the way out. And we would really count the votes and we would post them on our website by performance.
So did he get impeached?
No, the question is, did he get convicted?
Did he get convicted? Excuse
Yeah.
me.
Once out of 28 performances.
Wow.
Now, to be fair, it's got to be 2/3 to remove him from office.
Mm-hmm.
One time, one matinee, there were enough votes to remove him from office. 5 or 6, there were a majority hating him. But you got to understand the dynamics of that theater.
But they also have like the history of like what's been pushed in real life versus what you're seeing on the play.
Well, of course, and the play is totally hypothetical, um, and they don't know what to do with these documents we're disclosing. They'd never heard about them before. They're like
Hmm.
you, they didn't read the books.
Yeah.
And a self-selected group of people that live in Midtown Manhattan aren't going to be conservative. Half of them may have come thinking it was going to dump on Nixon.
Hmm.
Trial on the Potomac, we'll get to relive the sacrifice of Richard Nixon.
Kick him out of
But
there
in any
again.
event, there were 28 performances, and all but one he walked free. Well, not he would have been ruined, but he walked free.
Right.
It was a fun. And then that same guy just did the documentary that won the film award. So and I would keep saying to him, now, George, this has got to be accurate. I'm not exposing this one slight factual error and we'll really get reamed.
Yeah.
And he would say, yes, Geoff, but we're not filing a legal brief. This is supposed to be entertaining. People are supposed to enjoy the performance, So, and he said, look, in the play, you can't hear it. He's a concert pianist, amongst many things. Uh, he said, you can't hear it, but there's a meter to the dialogue. And you can't put in big words
Mhm.
because the actors have to be able to mouth them and project to the back of the theater. And it's got to have kind of a syllabic progression.
Yeah.
So you leave these words to me, and you can come tell me if it's factually incorrect. We'll change it. But you'd be wasting your time if you tried to write the dialogue.
That
Because
makes sense. I think that, yeah.
you
I
don't
think
know
that's
how.
a good
Yeah.
like give and take between the two of you.
Yes. And the reason the documentary won has nothing to do with me. I happened to uncover the documents, but it's the fact the documents exist that is so startling.
Hmm.
And he wrote the play. He wrote the documentary, and he really did a very very creative job. We're getting an award for creativity.
I'm
So
gonna I'm gonna go watch it,
pleased with
the
that.
documentary.
You can get it if you go on watergatesecrets.com. They'll
Perfect.
charge you $4 to rent, $9 to buy. Um, There's also a link on my website. We want to pitch my website for a second.
Yeah.
Shepardonwatergate.com.
And
That's what
I'll link that in the show notes too, so that way it's super easy.
it
People
is.
can just
Put it
click.
up, www.shepardonwatergate.com. In law school, particularly Harvard, the big important professors, they had a case book, and it was always titled that way. Kasner and Leach on real property, Chadbourne on evidence, Bice on administrative law. So mine is like a case book. And what makes the website so intriguing, I've posted under the books, under the window shade of the books, all the appendix documents, a summary of the book, who the characters are. So if you're cheap, you don't have to buy the book. You can get the goodie, the research goodie, out of my website. And then I have a annotated chronology under resources, 150-page chronology of every
Wow.
single thing. Because when I'd run across it, I'd put it in the chronology
Hmm.
so I could reference it in the future. But it's annotated, so it kind of tells the story of Watergate. This document was produced, but it's not credible.
Right.
And but it changed their position, and then it was in anticipation of that document. And I'm writing my book about the plumbers the same way. It's a chronological presentation, which I think is the only way to understand
I
something
agree.
like Alexis Watergate.
I think it makes sense because then you can kind of understand. And I go, like, when I do my episodes, I go into the history a little bit because I can't just start with Watergate because that's not where
No,
it
you can't.
starts. And
No.
so I always go into the history a little bit before I jump into conspiracy because I think that to me, that's the only way that you can fully understand whatever conspiracy I'm trying to present.
Yes.
So,
Well, for Vietnam, you got to go back to World War II. For the misuse of government conduct, is there a national security exception? You got to go back to 1936. I mean, when they're starting to go into World War II, and
mhm,
they were worried about the Germans and then the Japanese. So it's our opponents in World War II. Then it's communists. Hoover was really down on communists.
mhm.
Then it's women's lib. Who
Interesting.
are these women? And then it's anti-Vietnam, pasty-faced peace creeps against the war. And what you can conclude, I'm conservative, but once they labeled you, I'm forgetting the word. It begins with an S, a subversive. Once they labeled you a subversive, it goes World War II, communist civil rights agitators, women's lib, anti-Vietnam. Once they called you a subversive, you had no rights.
Mm,
They could investigate you. They opened your mail. They photographed you. They followed your kids.
I don't love
They
that at all.
sought they sought to all of that against the law. They sought to destroy your reputation. I mean, they wrote Martin Luther King 17 wiretaps. Well, I was saying, I've written 3 books, produced 2 documentaries, and done an off-Broadway stage play. But I've done 2 other things that are not Watergate related. Uh, After Nixon resigned, his staff blew apart and went in their different directions.
Hmm.
And there was no email, and there was no cell phones, and there was no computers. So what I did was keep the record of where people were going, people
Oh.
I worked with. Now, you got to understand the organization of the White House staff. There's people who run campaigns, and campaigns are like kaleidoscopes, constantly changing, new nuances, different uh, initiatives. But governing doesn't work that way. The challenges of governing don't change very much, and you need people who've been there before.
Yeah.
You can't learn on the job how to be a cabinet secretary. So what we were losing was the Republican brain trust,
Mm.
particularly after Ford lost. So we don't hold office anymore. Used to be, if you wanted to talk to the Secretary of Defense, you'd ask the White House operator to get you the Secretary of Defense. Or if you had a memo that counted, you'd give it to Central Files. You wouldn't keep an extra copy.
Right.
It's only Pat Moynihan, who'd been in government before, who kept his own copy of everything that crossed his desk. And I asked him, why would you do this? It's always there. He said, because I'm going to write books and I don't want to have to go there to look for it. I want my copy.
Yeah.
So shortly after we bandied apart, um, my secretary had one of the first IBM electronic typewriters with those index cards.
Yeah.
Do
Hmm.
bend, fold, spittle, or mutilate these cards. And she could reproduce a page, change two words, and reproduce the page again. So it was the ability to maintain stuff currently.
Yeah.
We started keeping the phone numbers and addresses of where our colleagues were going. So we maintained the directory of Nixon policy planning people. And then that group, I started arranging and hosting annual reunions, again, of the policy planning staff, NSC, Domestic Council, and OMB, Office of Management, and White House people we worked with, the speech writers or the congressional relations folks. So every November, after the election, this was not a campaign group, we'd meet for lunch, 3-hour lunch, and talk about old times or what people were doing or where they were going. And you'd go around the room, who's
Yeah.
doing what. And we kept that up. It's even through today.
Wow.
It's now done by the Nixon Foundation, but there was no Nixon Foundation.
Hmm.
They opened the Nixon Library in 1991. This was 1975, 76, 77. So I take credit humbly for keeping the governing brain trust together and in touch through the wilderness years. In addition to that, starting in 2010, I started producing documentaries on Nixon's public policy initiatives.
Mm.
And we call them Nixon Legacy Forums. They're co-sponsored by the National Archives.
Okay.
And we'll take an issue: desegregation of the Southern schools, welfare reform, trip to China, reducing crime, breaking up organized crime, creating EPA. We've produced, since 2010, over 40 Nixon legacy forums, which feature the people who wrote the memos, the people that developed the policy, on a stage at National Archives, talking about what they did, what they tried, why it worked or didn't work.
So that's all like the good that Nixon did while he was in
Yeah,
office to
right.
combat like all this evil that we think of when we think of Nixon.
We are told by the National Archives we are the only administration to hold regularly scheduled reunions and to produce documentary videos on public policy initiatives. And so what I want to mention, in addition to Watergate and the cheating and the impropriety, you cost the nation the good of Richard Nixon for the rest of the second term. We stopped him good and plenty. We caused him to resign,
Hmm.
and we lost all of that government knowledge, all of those initiatives, all of those efforts to make America a better place. If you look at his domestic affairs, I'm not I'm a domestic guy. I don't do foreign affairs. When he got elected, nation's tearing itself apart.
Hmm.
He looks around. This is a metaphor. He looks around across this great nation, says, okay, who's got a bitch? Who feels mistreated by their government? You Indians, you feel mistreated by the government? I'll restore your treaty rights. And he did. You blacks, you feel cut out of education? I will peacefully integrate the Southern schools. And he does it all in the beginning of 1971. Vast majority of Southern schools integrate. You think we're poisoning the atmosphere? We'll create EPA. We'll pass the Clean Air, the Clean Water, the Marine Mammal Act. We'll do those things. You think that women are taken advantage of because there aren't enough in government? I'll quadruple the number of women appointed to high government posts
Wow.
in my administration. You think you can go off and fight the war, but you can't vote? We'll lower the voting age to 18. We'll do away with the draft. We'll switch first to a lottery and then to the all volunteer army. Right across the road, he's got initiatives to try to give people a fair shake. I may have missed one or two, but it
I bet
really,
that's why they needed to frame him. They,
well,
and this is just a
needed,
conspiracy theory
it is. No, but they needed to stop him.
because
He
he
just
was,
wiped the slate, biggest landslide in American history, and they had no comeback. They'd
yeah.
run a progressive, they'd run George McGovern and got wiped out. And the only thing they had was Watergate, and they blew it out of proportion, and they got him. But now it turns out they left a paper trail, and we know how they cheated.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I do. I really appreciate. I feel like I learned a lot more, even though like I just did finish my episode and I'm about to record it actually. And this episode will come out right before my Watergate episode, so then they'll have like this
Sure.
background to jump.
Right.
It'll be awesome. So
Be fun.
I
Look
really
forward
appreciate
to
it, Geoff. Thank you.
it. Bye bye now.
Until next week, my friends, stay skeptical and we will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.